Today we are going to talk about different amendments that have extended government power. First amendment we are going to discuss is the 16th Amendment, which was passed in 1913. It allowed Congress to have the power to levy an income tax. The Second Amendment to extend government power was the 18th Amendment, which was passed in 1919. It prohibited the manufacture, sale, or transport of alcohol. It was repealed in 1933 by the 21st Amendment. It did keep it illegal to transport alcohol into states where it was banned by state law. Your fun fact about the 18th Amendment, that it was never actually illegal to consume alcohol during this time. They just made it virtually impossible and illegal to obtain alcohol during this time. But if you had, I don't know, a bottle of wine laying around the house or something with alcohol in it that was in your possession before the amendment was passed, you could still technically drink it or consume it after the 18th Amendment was passed. We're also going to look at different amendments that have extended individual rights. And the three biggest ones are probably the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, or they're often called the Civil War Amendments. So in 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed that outlawed slavery. 3 years later, in 68 or 1868, you had the 14th Amendment, which prohibited a state from depriving someone life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Essentially, that means all citizens have the right to equal protection of the law in all states. So it was a way of making sure that southern states after the Civil War honored the Constitution and equally enforced it among all its people, including the recently freed slaves. The 15th Amendment, which was passed in 1870, and it prohibited the government from denying people the right to vote based on race. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote, and that was passed in 1920. Most states had actually allowed women the right to vote, but now they could vote in all national elections. What's interesting about this is at the founding of the country, or in the early years, New Jersey actually allowed women to vote. And then that was slowly taken away, but it was interesting, or it is interesting to kind of think about in terms of that was nearly, 250 years before before there was an amendment to the Constitution for it. And then the 23rd Amendment was passed in 1961, and it allowed the people of Washington, D.C. to vote in national elections. It gave them 3 electors in the Electoral College, which D.C. is really a District of Columbia. It's not a state, so that is why they were prevented from voting in national elections up through that point. The 24th Amendment was passed in 1964, and it prohibited poll taxes in federal elections. And then the 26th Amendment was passed in 1971, which lowered the voting age to 18 in all federal and state elections. During this time, you had the civil rights movement. So some states would have poll taxes to prevent poor people and poor African Americans from participating in voting. And in 1971, you had Vietnam, and people were of the belief that if sons could go off and fight and die for their country at the age of 18, they should be able to vote in federal elections